Welcome to the most important video in the tone value module. Since beginners by definition doesn't have much experience, it is generally difficult to being super objective and draw values exactly correct everywhere. It is hard to do without what I'm about to teach you. The previous few lessons should help a lot. This one is gonna help more, and when you put all the ideas together, the knowledge is extremely powerful. Alright, most drawings and more complex drawings, it's not like one of my exercises where I give you 5 blocks of value and you know exactly which to copy over block by block, and you know exactly what percentage of value they are. When you draw from any type of reference, the reference doesn't tell you, oh, this part here, the tone value is about 80% of pure dark tone, and this part next to it, it is 65%. You can try to really pay attention to the reference. But again, the concept in this lesson will make things more accurate and easier, and you will be much less likely to make mistakes. Okay, one of the biggest mistakes almost everyone makes early on in their art journey is when you put down values based on reference, you fall to the pitfall of exaggeration or get tricked by any kind of optical illusion or context bias. This one is a really strong example. If I ask you to draw this, you are very likely to get the values wrong, even if the reference is right in front of you. Let's say I'm not using this extreme example, and the reference is something that is not an optical illusion. You are still extremely likely to get some values wrong. This picture just so happens to make a very good example, because if you learn to shade based on this one accurately, nothing else is going to trick you. So, if you look at this square and you draw the value, and then you look at the square next to it in the reference, right? And you only consider the shade next to it. So you put down a value, you look at the reference of what value you should put down next to it, and you see that it is lighter than the one you already put down, or darker than the one you already put down. So basically you are judging the value you need to put down by comparing it to its surroundings and put down what you think is the correct value. You may even try your best to compare it to the reference. This seems logical, but is a recipe for mistakes. Or at best, slow your drawing down a lot. Also imagine you have to draw this square and then this square. You're certainly going to draw two different shades, even though they are the same. But the most common thing you do is you start shading, put down a value, and then you look at the reference, look at the surrounding values, and if they're darker or lighter, then you put the value down next to it accordingly. So as I mentioned, this is a pitfall that vast majority of beginners face. What are you doing wrong? You are looking at the reference, comparing the value you are now putting down relative to the value of its surroundings. You are shading and assess the shade based on its neighbors. By doing so, we are gonna generally fall into exaggeration bias. This is one of the most common bias, especially if you are new. If a value you want to draw is darker than the value you are comparing it with, we tend to make the dark value more dark than it should be. If it's relatively lighter, we tend to make it lighter than it should be. We are also likely to be victims to context bias, like this optical illusion, or just make mistakes in judgment from whatever reason in general. Even if the mistake is small, it's gonna build up and really affect the final drawing. So, what's the solution? Simple. Do not ever assess and put value down based on relative comparison, such as being influenced by a value's surroundings. When you draw a new value, don't look too closely at its neighbor for value guidance. Instead, always put down all values compared to a single common value, or better yet, a single common gradient scale. I'll demonstrate. I'm going to use digital tablet, but the concept is of course the same on paper. Okay guys, welcome to this demonstration, and I decided to use one of the evaluation pictures. Why not, right? And it's perfect for this demonstration. And just a few things to keep in mind. Evaluation is for me to get an idea of where everybody is. It's not a competition. Maybe I'll do those later on. So the worse you are at evaluation, the more you have to improve actually. So you may improve even faster. This, however, is just one of the better spheres that I can see and use. Shout out to Anthony Williams. There's a lot of spheres that you guys did a pretty good job on. And what is a better way for me to demonstrate what I'm talking about than to take somebody who obviously have some experience already. Oh, by the way, if your drawing is really good, I might give it a little compliment, but I'm not here to hand out gold stars. You're gonna get compliments for the rest of your life once you get really good. I'm more about pointing out problems and give you like constructive criticisms. In fact, the better you are, the more pickier that I will become. I will give you more criticism, constructively. The better you are. Otherwise, you'll be a waste of your time. There's no point to point out you're already doing a good job when I can spend the same time making you better. All right. Remember, the better you are, the tougher I'm gonna be on you. Okay. This drawing, I fixed the contrast a little bit. I fixed the gradient a little bit, and what I'm gonna do now is make his drawing a little bit blurry because there's too much texture on his drawing. Not that it's bad in general, just for this demonstration purposes. Let me make the right side, the sphere, a little bit rounder. So I'm going to use liquify tool. If you're familiar with Photoshop, you know exactly what that is. Okay, that's good enough. And for the purpose of this demonstration, I'm not going to worry about shadows, the shadow on the ground. Now, immediately, just by, it's a sphere, right? So you have a lot of leeway to make mistakes and you will still look good as a sphere. But if you make the same mistakes on a human face, it's not going to be that forgiving. This, since it's a sphere, it's a great job. But I'm just gonna point out something that you can almost see very quickly. Ready? Remember when I said the better your drawing is, the harsher I'm gonna be. You see this shadow here? Obviously it's brighter than it's supposed to be, so you create this illusion. Now that I point out, people are gonna see it. They cannot unsee it, I'm sorry. What did I tell everybody in the beginning of this lesson? We tend to look at something compared to its neighbor surround values, because this part is lighter than this part. Is therefore that we tend to exaggerate and make it lighter than it should be. And then any part is darker, we like to exaggerate and make it darker than it should be. In this case, the lighter part is played a more significant role, that kind of a mistaken bias. Okay, so how do we fix this? Let us bring out a common gradient. You can use one common value, but a common gradient is slightly easier. You can actually print out a gradient sheet. You know, remember I said earlier in the lesson, I said you can use a paper and you can just cover up everything else, so you can just compare the reference, any point on the reference to a common place on the gradient. Well, an even better method is just print out a strip of gradient paper, so you can move that over the picture, and then in that sense be able to judge what value it is. Now let's look at this part here. This is now the biggest thing. The relationship between this part and this part. He looks like this, or he look at that first. I don't know which one he looked at first, but doesn't really matter. And then he start drawing and shading relative value. He's looking at this part and he's saying this area is lighter than the top, or he look at the top part and says lighter than the bottom. Let's look at see how he exaggerated how bright it is. But let's say how bottom part and at the brightest part here, where it start to get bright and start to receive that rebound light. And you see that it is actually, squint your eyes a little bit to the point where there will be a segment where it basically melts one into another. You cannot no longer tell much of a difference, right? And it's like 7.5. If he had done that, not only he'll get this value correct, and look at 7.5. Look the difference between 7.5 and how dark he is. And even because his circle entirely is lighter, even at 7, it is still darker than what he's drawn. See how the gradient, even at 7, the correct one is at 7.5, but even at 7, it's still darker than what he put down. I have to keep moving to 6.5. Now we're get to the value. So you can say that if you're comparing the gradient to its neighbors, you make all kinds of mistakes. But if you're comparing gradient to a common source, you're not gonna make the mistakes. So now that being said, for the sake of just give you guys something more entertaining to watch, I'm gonna start to modify his drawing a little bit. Remember transition zone? This has a much longer transition zone. It goes, and his transition zone is a little bit shorter. His transition is like this. Even though on the actual thing it's like that. See, everything I taught you guys is coming to play now. And of course, anything I do here works on paper, so it's just a little bit easier for me to redo and show you guys and so on. And this should be darker. I don't know if I should just make it a little bit darker. Right now you're like, oh my god, that is so dark. Not really. Only if you don't finish drawing, right? And you see how if he did the system that I used, now that part there is so obviously off, even by look. But there are times where even if you did, like say, the shadow part correctly, that part there would still be slightly too light. You still can't see it straight away. That's how precise you have to be. Because imagine if you join somebody and you join their cheek, the tiniest off in gradient can change the perspective of what they're looking at. I mean, normally I would you as a beginner, any of you as a beginner, okay, as I'm just play around with this right now, as you can move this thing around, and you can figure out exactly what value at any place is. You know that the value on which is roughly here, the value is supposed to be 6.2 or something like that, 6.3. You know, you would know. So for you guys, you can move this things around to double check your drawings and to make sure the values are correct. And obviously gradient is easier. However, if you can only use one value, that's fine too. You just have to be, it's a little bit more difficult. If you only have, let's say, the midtone, make sure everything relating to the midtone is correct. Right? So this one is about, you can say this part here is about, I don't know, 30% darker than the midtone. This part is about 20% darker than the midtone. Even that won't be quite as accurate for beginners than using a full gradient. You will still be much more accurate than if you just use your eyesight. And if you find gradients difficult, make them into boxes where each box is just one shade, from going from 1 to 10. Okay, I think there's a lot of part that I can do better if I just spend more time on it. I already spent more time on it than I wanted to, which is about 12 minutes. I'm essentially following the same method of comparing every value to the value on the gradient. I just have enough experience to not have to move the gradient around. But early on, you guys might need to do that. And you can see that this way of doing things, it's just going to give you a much more accurate drawing. I'm not trying to put anyone on the spot, but look at the difference, okay? Before, after. If you just try to eyeball everything, even if let's say if I can make your joints with the same dark value. Okay, now I get the dark value part of the joint correct, but then you still see there is this weird patch on the bottom right. And then the highlight is there, but then all the colors around the highlight is much darker than it's supposed to be. So remember when I told you guys earlier in the lesson that we tend to exaggerate? So if we compare something to the highlight, it's darker than what it's supposed to be. Or if we, relatively speaking, if we're comparing the highlight to its surroundings, you put the highlight down last, for example, it is lighter than what it's supposed to be if this whole ball becomes that darker, right? So this way, I just adjust the value so that the darkest part of the ball on the surface is same as the reference. But now you see how your entire value is kind of off now. It's not the same ball, not the same light, not the same ball. Still a very beautiful ball, but it's a different ball. So when you draw later on, when you draw more complex things like that, you cannot get away with this kind of mistake. Look at how simple this idea is, yet how powerful it is. Most people, if they try to teach themselves by practicing, probably will take a very long time to figure things out, and maybe improve on value just by sheer practice and experience. But just in 10 minutes of this lesson, you can now do much more accurate tones for everywhere on your drawing, immediately, and not fall for any subjective mistake. Initially, you can cover up the surrounding values on the reference, like using a piece of paper and just cut 2 holes. So you're only comparing the value you need to put down to a common value reference, whether it is a series of boxes if you are new, or judge roughly where it is on a smooth gradient scale. Over time, you won't even need to cover up anything. You can just focus on any value you need to put down and look at the reference and evaluate what the value actually is by comparing it to that common gradient and ignore relating to any neighbor values. And as you gain more and more experience, you don't even need to put down any common gradient. You can just look at the value of any point on the reference and not be influenced by its neighbors or some optical illusion. This will take some experience, but you see how this simple system will make sure at any point the tone value of your drawing is objectively accurate. This simple idea is one of the most important things, but if no one points it out, you're gonna do the common sense thing, make a lot of mistakes, even if you're doing diligent practice, and maybe improve your value assessment in several months instead of immediately. Okay, we covered the importance of value precision from large form to smaller forms and details. We covered the concept of transition distance and paying attention to the way one tone changes to another, since it's not always linear. And in this lesson, you now have a system to never fall prey to inaccurate value judgment. All of this knowledge in about 30 minutes. But it's like half semester of art school. Now you can go to my next module, which is proportions. If you don't see it yet, I'm in the process of making it. And you guys who are early members are gonna be experts by the time more people come in. Cheers!